Meanwhile, another pro-abortion talking point is the word barbaric, as in reverting back to the barbaric days when we placed restrictions on women's ability to kill their children in the womb. Many in the left laud the countries of Europe whose socialism they've long envied. Actress Jessica Biel posted a photo of herself and husband Justin Timberlake in Paris above the caption, quote, "You have croissants and women's rights. Man, take me back." But the thing is, France has a ban on abortions after 14 weeks, almost identical to the bans in Florida and Texas that American liberals have been desperately trying to portray as barbaric regression. And our next guest says most countries in Europe have very similar bans. Joining us now to discuss all of this, which he writes about in this recent piece published on Substack, is speaker and writer Ian Haworth. Thanks for being here tonight, Ian.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So lay out some of those European bans for us. It seems many people are unaware of them, to say the least.
Yeah, I think that's what's so amazing, is you see so many of these leftists like to roll out Europe as their go-to example for what the United States could be. But if we look at multiple civilized European nations, they have pretty restrictive abortion legislation, far more restrictive than Mississippi and Florida would have. So Spain, for example, Finland in some cases, we're looking at Belgium, country after country after country, Germany is another one. The fact is that the world is just not on the same page as a lot of the radical pro-abortionists in the United States.
And you also point out something interesting in your Substack piece. I believe the numbers you pulled were from the United Nations when it comes to the number of abortion, the amount of abortions taking place. The U.S. actually outpaces, as you mentioned. I think France and a few other nations. Talk to us about some of those numbers and who are some of the other nations who even outpace us and who we therefore are sadly in the company of.
I mean, the United States by far outpaces every other developed nation on the planet when it comes to the rate of abortion, so the abortions per 1,000 women every year. But then the countries that are beating them, if you want to use that horrific term, we're talking about countries like China, Vietnam, not countries that anyone wants to be in, and certainly not countries that respect women's rights. And so there's a very, very strange juxtaposition being pushed by the left that more abortions is a good thing, and that's simply not the case.
And you came here from the UK yourself. Why do you think so many people in these European nations take such a keen interest in what's going on in the United States that you see them marching in the streets in France and elsewhere over Roe?
Well, I think a lot of it is why people are marching in the streets over Roe in the United States is that they simply haven't been informed what Roe actually does. They don't understand that it's just passing the decision back to the state. And if you're in California, New York, or any number of democratic states, you're still going to be able to get an abortion. And it'll likely be easier because a lot of these states will react to Roe being taken away. But people do not understand really what the Supreme Court is there to do. They just read the headlines and assume that women are being forced to give birth with the forced birth narrative that you mentioned earlier. They're just simply uninformed in the same way that Jessica Biel is uninformed that France is actually strict on abortion in Mississippi.
And I also have to admit, Jessica Biel, this is the first time I've heard of her too. I guess I'm really out of touch on a lot of these people. I'm like, who are they? But people listen to them, so I guess we've got to respond. But do you think this, as you know, the fallout of Roe has continued now, I think into the second week, do you think it's really unmasked a lot of the ugliness of abortion? I'm sure you've seen on social media, on TikTok videos, on posts, even the Washington Post had articles like this, where you'll see perhaps a young woman or a young man, and they'll say, me with my baby being poor because our government wouldn't let us have an abortion, things like that. I'm like, that's really gross and really on the nose. But have you noticed an uptick of really the ugliness and almost the crassness of how we're talking about human life?
Absolutely, but I think I've noticed this in the last couple of years. We remember just a few years ago, the Democrats were talking about abortion, safe, legal, and rare. And now they're the party of shouting your abortion and celebrating your abortion as some kind of moral right in our world. And I think the things we're seeing on the streets in America are just indicative of where the Democratic Party has gone on the subject of abortion. They think it's something that you can be proud of, that you should be cheering on in the streets, that women who have a baby inside them can say, this is not a baby. It's quite terrifying, but indicative of a real immoral rot at the center of the Democratic Party right now.
That's exactly right, Ian. Thank you so much for dropping by tonight.
Thanks for having me.